Hello.
Hello, dear John.
Hello.
Ah, there you are. It's lovely to see you.
Yeah, you too. You look great. That's a great whole setup you've got going on there.
Isn't this
it,
nice? Yeah.
yeah, but even
It's
with your lights, it's got a sort of musical, theatrical kind of quality. It's great.
that sounds about right, actually. That sounds like me completely. What a pleasure. You know, your fame goes before you.
Oh,
You
really?
really
Oh,
have the
good.
most, oh, you have the most beautiful reputation. It's really lovely, actually. And your environment too is great. It's kind of slightly musical, as a matter of fact.
Oh, lovely.
Oh, great.
Yeah, well, I mean, your fame is pretty legendary as well. So Um, now, if you're listening, this is the John and Edward Mutual Appreciation podcast.
It really
No, I
is,
am
yes.
talking
That's all we're
to,
going to do.
yeah, I'm talking to Edward Povey in Devon. You're in Devon, is that right, Edward?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Really
Um,
just around the corner from you.
yeah, I have friends in Devon. They're in Woodbury. I don't know if that's you. You're North Devon, so it wouldn't be a million miles from. They're close enough
Yes.
to Exeter.
Yeah, yeah. Just down the road. Yeah.
Lovely. And just to give you a time context for our conversation, today is Wednesday, the 2nd of March, 2022. So, let's start off with a nice, simple one. Just for someone who's listening, one of the few people who haven't actually seen your paintings, how would you describe them, Edward?
I think of them as a kind of emotional realism, I think. I think that they are very deceptive because they pose as one thing. They pose as many things that they are not. I, I believe. Of course, really, in the end, society gets to figure out what it regards them as. But what I regard them as is not not realism in the usual sense, but human realism, because it's all founded on the human experience, the experience of this life, probably internally. Yeah, something like that. I'm trying to feel my way around it. You'd think I'd know.
No, I think that's pretty good.
It's like
This,
when you say to someone, describe yourself, and they struggle with the question, well, they're inside themselves all the time, but describing it is another matter.
yeah. I think that human realism is great. That's a really good distinction. It's almost like real realism.
From our perspective, yes. Yes. And there's no other that we know of or can know of. So, yeah, that's about it.
Yeah. Okay, we've had lots of questions come in from social media, so we'll get into those as well. Maria Gisela Betancourt on Instagram says, "When did the love for painting awaken in you?"
Very early and in the strangest way. It's really kind of interesting. I I had, and I won't mention this that much, but I had a very strange father. He was very brutal and very scary. But by nature, I'm quite guileless by nature. I'm a child in a certain way that never grew up. Mm, and I have the ability to ignore things. So I ignored all of that, all the fear, everything else that was going on, and became obsessed with London buses. And what I was obsessed with was, this is at the age of 7. I was obsessed with how they were put together not from an engineering perspective, but how they looked and how all the parts fitted together. It was all I thought about. And I drew thousands of drawings of buses until I could draw a bus. That was what obsessed me. Yep. So you could say the age of 7, by 10 I was painting landscapes and still lifes in next to the laundry cupboard in the kitchen. And it sort of went on from there. Yep, that's the earliest.
And do you think, did you like to go on buses as well? Or was it just, the visual side of it that appealed to you?
Well, I like buses, but that's like asking the fish about the fishbowl in London. The fish is not really aware of the fishbowl, and there are buses everywhere. So yes, I was on them all the time, I suppose, but barely aware of them, except in this weird visual way of how they were built. Well, now I'm really interested in how human beings are built. So I've just transferred my fascination.
Yeah, it was kind of in that, because you were saying you had, your difficult father, difficult situation, and your capacity to ignore what was going on. Do you think that was compartmentalizing it? Do you think? And the bus thing, I was wondering, was that like some part of you trying to get away?
Probably, yes. I mean, it was the weirdest excuse or the weirdest opportunity. The structure of buses, I mean, it's sort of absurd, really, isn't it? When I look at it in that way. But yes, I suppose I was very, very fascinated with the visual look of things. Yeah. But yeah, compartmentalizing, I suppose it was really. And I mean, just to give it a really remarkable parallel, at the age of 16, I walked into the Canadian Embassy in London and said, I want to go to Canada. And they said, you're too young. You'll have to come back in 2 years and have a job. So on my 18th birthday, I walked in and said, I want to go to Canada. And they said, how old are you? 18. Do you have a job? Yes, I do. I was there in 8 weeks. I emigrated on my own. I just emigrated.
Wow.
So that was compartmentalizing it. Bye.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
You've been compartmentalized. Oh, dear. Yeah.
Just to kind of put your sensibilities in context, who are your creative heroes? Are they all artists or painters?
Yes, I have a lot of heroes, really. I mean, it began with the obvious ones, the really obvious. Well, actually, the first things I painted was table mats. I think they were painted by someone's auntie, but that was my first hero. But then obviously, it became Picasso, and the Impressionists, but very soon it really got a lot more specific and a lot more real. I started to love Stanley Spencer, not only his paintings, but his sensibility, his mixture of sexuality and religiousness. Really, I found that a beautiful contradiction. And it grew from there. Tamara de Lempicka was interesting, but now there are just so many, I can hardly number them. And yes, lots and lots of heroes. We all stand on the shoulders of our predecessors, don't we?
Yeah. Yeah. Any that weren't painters? Any heroes that weren't painters?
Hard to say, really. Nowadays, I'm very interested in actors, acting, directors, writers. They just fascinate me. I suppose what fascinates me is the creative process. really, really interest me. And so their lives and their way of doing these things and putting it together, that just fascinates me. It seems to instruct me in a certain way in what I do. It's very inspiring. Yeah.
Very good. Um, urinated in public. That's their name on Instagram. I don't know what their real name is.
Oh, that's a
Said,
wonderful name. Yeah.
tell us about your early life as an artist.
Well, my first mural was actually in an Israeli kibbutz. While I heard the bombers flying south to Lebanon, it was pastel, so I was drawing a mural on the wall of the kibbutz, and then everywhere I went, I toured with a band in Canada actually for a long time because I sang and
What was
wrote
the name of the
songs
band?
and all of that. Synergy, which sounded very original at the time, but Synergy.
It's been co-opted by the corporate world now, yeah?
It's Synergy, yes. It's just so philosophical. So we toured, and I painted. We had to travel a lot, so I painted and drew the whole time there. Then I was making paintings in a kind of lean-to back room in Brighton, in England, on the south coast, and it slowly grew. And I finally realized I was going to have to give up music, and so the music went to one side, and everything slowly made way.
What did you play, or what did you do in the band? Like, were you an instrumentalist or a vocalist, or?
I played the guitar and sang, and I sort of headed the band. I wasn't particularly good, I have to say, but there are some extraordinary stories. I was taught the guitar a little bit by an old Mississippi blues man in Canada, Reverend Gary Davis, blind Reverend Gary Davis. Wow. He was one of my heroes. Yeah,
that's the beginning of a book there.
Oh, he was a lovely guy, actually. Yeah, very sweet. Well, anyway, then quite by chance, I moved to Wales to go to college because the government were giving us money to study, just giving us our living. So I went to Wales, and quite by chance there, a friend said, will you paint a mural on the side of my shop? And then I did that one. He said, oh my God. So now here's a 2-story building. And I just fell into it, and the BBC turned up and started filming it. And then I went to the next, and in a 7-year period, I painted 25 multi-story murals, well, interior and exterior. And it was like my apprenticeship. It was really good training because it was hard work, and it taught me to work. And, learning to work is probably one of the hugest, most important things in an art career, I think, is to learn to get up, to get out of bed. It's probably the biggest lesson. Yes. What would you recommend in art training? Well, really, to get out of bed is first.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. So that was my apprenticeship. Yeah.
Very good. Maria Kiriakov in Canada says, I would like to learn more about the transition from a mural painter in the 70s and 80s to a painter of large format paintings. Mr. Povey's characters are under gigantic magnification, and his greatest achievement, in my opinion, is the emotional charge they carry.
That's very lovely, coming from an extraordinary painter. Maria Kiriakov is extraordinary. So I painted all these murals. This is very nicely chronological, actually, John. Thank you. And so I painted all the murals, but I got more and more picky about them, and I used to take the boards out of the scaffoldings. You'd have a 6-story scaffolding, and I would slide all the boards out of it so that I could see it, because otherwise you can't see it with all the boards in the way. And to get the colors right and make adjustments, I used to have to slide them out. So then I walked on the rails in the wind and rain in Wales, on the rails, 6 stories up, making these adjustments. It's astonishing that I'm still alive. But it got to the point where I wanted to make more adjustments than you conceivably can on a 6-story building. My needs were growing the whole time, and I outgrew that because it was too technically difficult to perfect them. So then I decided, well, I've got to get away from all these commissions, because there were an endless stream of commissions for murals. So I literally went and lived on a tropical island in the Caribbean then, and had a studio there in the garage, and a bridge from the back of the house to the back of the garage, so I wouldn't have to meet people and take time talking, you know. And for 7 years, I stayed on that Caribbean island with my young family, and I made commissioned paintings and a lot of other paintings, and met my first American collectors, and it kind of kicked it off. And I've only in the last few years started gravitating towards large figures in answer to some requirements of the work. I need the scale increasingly because of what I want to deal with. Yeah. So you know, so it was this gradient from mural painting, suddenly Caribbean island canvases, and then this slow gradient towards much bigger paintings. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a bit extreme to go to. Couldn't you have just said no to the portrait commission or to the mural commissions? And
well, it's another stupid excuse. You know, I want to ignore my dad. I'll draw buses. You know, I could have drawn egg cups. You know, I want not to do mural commissions. I'll fly halfway around the world and live on a tropical island. Please don't expect it to make any sense. But it was a wonderful period. It was really a lovely period.
Yeah,
because no communication. You know, I had a studio, and that was it. No telephone, nothing.
Wow. Do your kids have happy memories from that time? Like, it sounds like an idyllic kind of, you know, 7 years on a tropical island. Sounds fantastic.
Yeah, I think they do. I mean, it was the best kind of childhood, because white sand beaches. They went to the most basic kind of school, and we invented board games with a kerosene lamp and the sound of crickets in the background in the evenings. We invented these board games, and they would come home from school and say, "Dad, I think I've worked out a better way with this. If to make the game has got to be shorter, the game is too long right now, and here is how we can accomplish this goal." Well, anyway, you know, fishing, walking under magnolia blossom. I mean, it was lovely.
Yeah, sounds beautiful. How many children do you have?
2 sons.
2 sons, yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Maria Gisela Betancourt again says, what inspires you? What moves you? And Nicola Honey in Birmingham says, what inspires you? How do you come up with the concept and ideas behind paintings? So yeah, just general kind of inspiration paintings, or if sometimes artists find that a difficult question. So I can give you an alternative to it is like, how does the idea for a painting start for you? So anything around that is fine.
It's a really good question, actually. I feel. Just to look back, because this has evolved. When I started with those mural commissions, I would get literally towns wanting a mural. A TV company wanted me to paint a mural about the history of the town. So I started out, just for practical reasons, painting human life from the outside, from a distance. And so in other words, I'm now looking at human beings on a sort of society level. Well, then, in the Caribbean studio, and having been to the Israeli Independence Day festivities in Tel Aviv, putting that in context, John, I was this kid, this only child kid of a working class family in the southeast of London with a difficult childhood. And somehow, by the age of 31, I'd done a mural in Israel, studied in the Independence Day festivities, toured with a band in Canada, painted 25 multi-story murals, and was now living on a Caribbean island. If you put it in a novel, it wouldn't sound exactly plausible, would you? Would it? You'd say, oh, yeah, right. That's not even believable. So when I got to the Caribbean, having been to Israel to those festivities, I became really interested in individuals, because I saw all these individuals walking in the streets of Tel Aviv in makeup and in extraordinary costumes. And I thought, wow, this would be so interesting, because a lot of it was filled with pathos, a kind of sadness. These people in wonderful costumes and this sort of sadness. So all the paintings began to focus on individuals and their costumes. And that slowly went and became more and more philosophical as the decades went by. And then I began to want to go now inside the human beings and see them from an internal perspective. That now really interested me. So the human experience really fascinates me. But the designs, back right to the question, the designs I find very, very hard to make. So I have a studio diary that I write, and it's the same diary, and I write it through years and years. It's got to be a foot thick, I think, by now at least. And so I write ideas and concepts, I draw, I evolve concepts, I manipulate them in this diary. And sometimes a design, I handle it for 2 years, 3 years before I paint it, because it's not ready, it isn't convincing me. And so out of everything in my life, all that emerges into a design, but it takes a very long time in the gestation. Yeah. And it's my human experience I'm very interested in.
Yeah. What's the spark of it, though? Is it a case of there's a particular aspect of the internal experience that sort of starts to press itself on you and like, yeah, I think I want to make a painting about that? Or does it come the other way? Like, is it more of an image first and then you start to fiddle around with that?
Hopping back again, when I was painting murals, because I use a concept that I figured out when I was painting murals. So when I was painting the murals, the first time I was given a really big one, many stories, I thought, oh my God, how on earth do I design something for a wall of this size? So I realized to people that pass these walls in cars, the wall is much smaller. So I went around the bend of the road and I walked around as if I was driving until I came into sight of the wall. And from that distance, I realized that the wall was the size of a postcard. So as long as the basic design could be made the size of a postcard and look very impressive on that scale. In the shadows, I could put details and information, I could elaborate it, but the fundamental thing you see from about 100 yards should be very, very simple concept. I do the very same thing now, really. I make tiny drawings of these paintings, literally 2 inches by an inch or something like that, tiny little drawings, until I like the flow of this tiny drawing, something about a movement or a posture that suggests a certain emotion. And slowly the design grows and then begins to be fleshed out and filled and fleshed and enlarged until it grows up. But I have to say, though, that it's only about 1 in 10 of them that grow up.
Right.
9 out of the 10 don't get the opportunity to grow up, because my concept for my work moves on and I leave a lot behind.
Yeah. So is it the visual or is it the emotion? Does the visual lead on to the emotion that's emerging from this little drawing?
I think they're very intertwined.
Yeah.
Actually. So that the one comes with the other. Yes. So that the posture and the feeling in that tiny drawing suggests a particular emotion, and the philosophy of the painting grows out of that. Yeah.
And is that unbidden, meaning, as it evolves and develops, and let's say it's to do with sorrow, is there a point where you go, oh, okay, it's a painting about sorrow, I must want to explore sorrow?
Actually, that really touches on a very important thing, because none of them are actually about anything. It doesn't mean that they're not meaningful or significant, but what it means is this, is that if you look at a mountain and you say, what is this about? You can dig up the whole mountain. You'll never find any instructions as to what it's about. Babies are born, and there's no writing that comes with them or no manual that you get explaining what this baby is about, what this baby means. So I believe that art, visual art, is not story primarily. It is not narrative. That is reserved for literature. And that visual art is about visually understood things. So if you're on a train in the summer and you're passing through a town and the train rushes past an alleyway, and in the alleyway you see a silhouette of 2 or 3 people standing, and for a split second you see one moving and another turning, you understand, emotionally understand that combination of postures. But it is completely unable to be turned into a story or words or anything more specific than that. But visually, it is understandable. Does that make sense? Or am I skirting a point? You know how good I am at ignoring things.
No, it's very good. That's great about the mountain and the baby. It's true. But then it seems like our brains, we're like, it's second nature to us to make stories. It's the classic thing of 2 or 3 people look at a painting and each one is like, oh, that's about my grandmother, and oh no, it's about peace in the world, and the other person is like, what are you talking about? It's a drama at the kitchen sink. Like if a person on a train saw that image, they'd be like, oh, I think they were fighting, or another, but no, they were about to dance. And like, can you really avoid that as an artist? Like, can you really avoid the fact that people are going to do that?
Again, a really, really good point, because as far as I can understand it, sentience, conscious awareness, comes with interpretation. The interpretation, making meaning, is instant and completely unavoidable. Our only way of seeing something is to interpret it. The two come literally intertwined, don't they? You see something, you immediately interpret it for your own well-being. Does this person want to attack me? Does this person want to hug me? Does this person want to sell me something? You know, I mean, what is the meaning of this person?
Yeah,
We
I think that's
interpret
true.
behavior.
I think that's true for people, you know, particularly on this, you know, if you're walking down the street or you're encountering people. But I think with paintings and
Yeah.
art in general, it's different because you can, I've had this experience, I don't know, you probably have as well, where you'll come upon a painting or a sculpture or something, and I will be suddenly feeling something without really understanding why I'm feeling it. So maybe it is, as you say, it's an interpretation, but if it is, it's gone on very fast and very unconsciously. And it feels different to me to the sort of interpretation where you're, you know, assessing threats with people, and you know, whether is this person safe and those kind of things. Art seems to penetrate in a deeper way, and it sort of seems to get into affect my presence, because my presence seems to be separate from my consciousness, because I can be present and not conscious, but I can't be conscious and not present.
That is interesting, yes. To that question of the interpretation of art, I think it is, of course, everyone's right, every viewer's right to interpret every artwork. Well, it's their birthright. It's unavoidable. It happens every time, to every individual. So the artist's interpretation need not be any kind of authority on the subject. It need not be the authority on the subject. In fact, some people have debated with me the meaning I ascribed to it years ago, and I wound up agreeing with them. You know, I wound up saying, oh my God, that's very perceptive. I think you're right. I think that, in fact, is what I was feeling. But I've found when I've been standing in lectures talking about paintings, and then after the lecture, people come up to me. One person will say, oh my God, I couldn't live with this. This is just so dark, so difficult. And the next person says, oh, I'm in love with this. It just fills me with love. You know, it's just a wonderful thing, and so forth. I mean, it's all completely different. And so actually historians come at it from a very different perspective, because they look for more tangible evidence of the meaning in relation to the artist's life, I suppose, don't they? But anyhow, yeah, I mean, I try not to contain the paintings as I'm making them, not contain them, allow them to lead me and allow them their space to, because emotions are not simple, are rarely simple. So I allow them the space to evolve. Yeah.
Yeah, lovely. Laura Atkins on Patreon, thanks for the tea, Laura, says, do you have any rituals that must be completed before beginning a painting?
Oh, that's very interesting, actually. Yeah. Yes. Every morning I have a little ceremony where I have to clean my brushes and prepare and do this and that and do this and that, you know, every day. it's tidying, it's housework in a way, studio housework, but it's one of those absolute necessities. And when I'm actually beginning a new painting, I like to clear away any other responsibilities. In fact, partly probably because of my childhood, I've always liked to have 2 locked doors between me and any other human being when I'm in the studio. Because when I'm there, I'm so very vulnerable and so in my own world that I cannot stand invasion. It would feel a little dangerous to me, invasion in that way. So I don't like just 1 locked door, but 2. That sounds pretty weird and pretty sort of ritualistic, doesn't it? But that is my preference. So yeah, when I'm beginning a new painting, I like to clear away emails, anything else that's pending, anything. It's like cleaning the table before you lay a new canvas on it. It feels like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think it's weird about the 2 locked doors. In fact, I think I think any kind of self-knowledge like that is so helpful because, and lovely that you give yourself permission to take care of yourself to do that, because it'd be easy to kind of go to get into a fight with yourself about that and go, oh, that's ridiculous, 2 locked doors, come on, and just waste a huge amount of energy on that, where it's lovely that you're kind of like, yeah, that's what makes me feel safe. So let me organize that for myself.
Yes, because yeah, you're right. Because at the end of the day, does it matter? Does it matter really? I mean, who would know or care? If there were 10 locked doors. I mean, well, that would be more difficult. But 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 yeah, who cares? And I think we should parent ourselves as lovingly as possible and be to ourselves like to a child with an attitude where you say, it's okay, sweetheart, what do you need? Okay, why not? That's not a big deal. If you need that, okay. And human beings are like that, I think. And in relationships, it's the same thing. What do you need? Okay, I don't care. I mean, if you need that to be happy, then okay. Yeah, it's like that, isn't it? I'm being like that because it's a kind of it shouldn't matter kind of shrug. It's a all right.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. Highly recommend it to everybody.
Yeah, love yourself. Yeah, be kind at least to yourself.
Yeah. So do you work from life or photos or a combination of both?
There are times in my career when I've worked from models quite religiously. Every painting was from a model. But now the paintings are way too private and way too complex to do that. I couldn't have a model in the room. I'm too empathetic and I'm too much of a pleaser. I would wind up entertaining the model instead of concentrating. Really, I would. And it's ridiculous, really. I'd wind up bringing them tea and entertaining them and laughing all day and not making a painting. And so, but there are other reasons too, and that is that the poses and the settings in my paintings are they are mixed perspectives. So the floor is and the tabletops are flattened against the surface of the canvas. The human postures are in many cases impossible. So I have to photograph the model. I sometimes photograph up to 3 models for one figure, and even combine bodies sometimes, bodies and heads, and rebuild the figure. And then I make them plausible again in the painting. But the only way to make these paintings is to make a stage set of the environment in the painting, photograph it from two angles, mixed perspective, one from above, almost above, looking down at it, and one from the side, looking at the side of it, because like Cézanne in that Cubist approach, I'm flattening the top and the side together. You're seeing both on a plane and rebuilding my model in them and making a photo montage that is highly detailed. And that's my only way. That's my only way that I can possibly do it. And then I make the composition based on that, but then I pull it all apart again and work from the individual photographs of all the things that occur in the painting. So yeah, it's complicated, it takes a long time.
Yeah. So you don't use Photoshop or something like that to help you with that?
I use PowerPoint, which I get laughed at about because the program can hardly keep up with it. But yeah, I do have to crop things out and rebuild them and resize them and do all kinds of things to them and rebuild the bodies and do all that stuff. So I use PowerPoint and it works for me, but you know, I'm told Photoshop would be much better. Yeah. I'll use absolutely whatever I have to accomplish the goal. Anything.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. I read in one of your interviews where you were saying that writers are not too interested in pens, and equally you're not that interested in paint, which I thought was a great idea.
No, I'm really not. And I was actually saying to someone recently, you know, when you have an intimate conversation on a phone, you don't think about telephones while you're having the conversation, like we're talking right now. But I'm not thinking about computers. I'm thinking about, and when I make paintings, I do not think about art, because art is the medium, like a phone or a pen or a computer. It's a medium. I don't think about any of that. I only think about the emotional charge in every object and the significance of every object. I have no interest in art in that sense.
Yeah. Andrew Bonu in Australia says, I'd be interested to know how your figures relate to symbolic meaning. Do they embody ideas, emotions, archetypes? And if so, in what way? Thank you. Really looking forward to this podcast.
That's a really great question. That's very interesting, actually. Yes. As a human being, I'm troubled. Well, shall we say, my experience of human life is that I'm troubled and agitated and haunted. And at the same time, I happen to be very happy. As a human being, I love my life, and I literally dance around, you know, I love it, but I do carry that agitation and troubled quality. And I think that the awkward postures of many of my figures, it's as if they are demonstrating something. I did a painting recently where someone was holding up a hand with a letter pinched between two fingers in the hand. I actually don't know what that means other than that they are demonstrating something, and I'm not sure what it is. The letter was actually sent to me. People send very intimate letters from their past that I can use in paintings, and I'm really indebted to them because I want every item in every painting to be authentic. So there was a letter that was walking away from a young lover and was really terribly sad. That was pinched between the fingers and held up. And what these postures mean, back to Andrew, I think it was, wasn't it? Andrew's point.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to say. The postures certainly have agitation. They're certainly tangled in some paintings and agitated, but there's another aspect to it as well, and that is the heads are often on one side. And that to me is a big combination of emotions. It is curiosity, like when you walk through a museum, people are often looking at paintings like this, you know, don't they? And also, you know, when someone has had a recent disaster in their life, you know, people say, "Oh, really? I'm terribly sorry," you know, and they put their head on one side. I think it is a mixture of empathy, curiosity, and also a kind of, in an extreme form, an agitation, a tortured agitation.
Yeah.
And it's all those things happening. Does that answer the question, John? Did I answer the question? Maybe I did.
How do your figures relate to symbolic meaning? Do they embody ideas, emotions, and archetypes? Yeah, I don't know if you touched on archetypes.
Archetypes? No, but I think, like the fishbowl, I think we carry them in any case. We carry them without being entirely aware of them.
Yeah.
We carry them, don't we? In so many things, the archetypes come through. Because it's our way of understanding things, isn't it? Those archetypes became our way of comprehending a human life. Archetypes, yeah. But like I have to say, though, it's not just the postures. Sorry, John. Yeah, what were you?
No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
Well, it's not just the postures where the symbolism occurs. It's actually the surface of the skin. And I suppose the painting behind me, which I'm looking at right now, is an example of that. That there is, you might say, either a symbolism or a representation in the fact that I want the veins and ligaments, and I pay very, very minute attention to where the skin is pitted or creased or wrinkled or has blemishes or moles. Because what I want to convey is this notion that when a person has a lover, that the lover carries the whole record of their life with them. That when you embrace them, you embrace a million sadnesses and a million joys and countless moments. And it's all in the surface of their skin and their expression. And that's why I break the body all the way down, you know. And I studied cadavers, bodies on slabs, a lot, without skin on them. I studied them a lot to understand the mechanics under the skin. But now I'm very interested in the skin of my models and in going deeper and emphasizing it, really exaggerating it. So yeah, all that carries the meaning. Yeah, very good.
So before you start the main picture, do you do color studies or value studies?
I sometimes have an idea, a specific idea. There are some notes on some paintings, but that is precluded to an extent in my paintings, because back in 2018, I came across Raphael's Ansi de Madonna in London in the National Gallery. He gives this atmosphere in his altarpieces of these troubled, haunted, starved, penitent figures. And I like it very much. I like it because to me, it conveys my human experience. I have this weird combination of spirituality and sexuality. That is Stanley Spencer, and haunted, troubled, actually very happy, somewhat childlike. And a lot of that is in Raphael's flesh. So I duplicated the colors. I studied the colors in the National Gallery, and then I duplicated them and tubed them. So now I have this base for all my paintings. What looks like black is nowhere near to black. It's actually like a dark reddish brown. What looks like highlights is actually a grey peppermint, a greyed peppermint color. And then there's the whole of the Raphael Verdaccio in between. So all the basis of the painting is built from his Verdaccio color base. And then I add some colors very, very sparingly into that. So as for do I make color studies? No, it kind of goes way back beyond that, years back. But then towards the end of the painting, I begin to actually design the color then. Yeah.
Right. And then the process of getting the little sketch onto the big canvas, how do you do that? Some, like, do you draw directly on the canvas, or just that drawing phase? How does that bit go for you?
Yeah, I often project it because it has to be very, very precise. Really, really precise. And the reason is, in the original design, I used Pythagoras's armature of the rectangle because I orchestrate the painting, not when it's in the tiny stage, although to an extent, but later in the drawings, I really orchestrate the painting according to the armature so that it's very, very precise. So that if, for example, a Pythagorean power line or a power point goes through eyes, I want it in the middle of the pupil, not just vaguely where the eye is. I want it right in the middle of the pupil because it's a very powerful thing. I mean, Pythagoras underlies all Western music, and every instrument in every orchestra is precisely in tune. It's not roughly in tune, it's precisely in tune. And then they can play something deeply romantic, thunderingly emotional, and completely beautiful. So it's no restriction in terms of the emotional power and rolling vibrance of a work of art. On the contrary, it requires that kind of precision. So the only way to do it is tiny gridding, squaring of the design or projection. There's only ways to do it, really.
Yeah. So do you have any tips then for using the projector? Because it's not as simple as just you set up your projector and off you go, because you've got to deal with light distortions and optical distortions and all sorts of things.
Yeah, it's very complicated. So it is tricky. So what I do, I use a very good quality projector, but then I also put the armature of the rectangle on the canvas, all those lines on the canvas, so that I can actually see whether or not I am dead on or whether things are drifting off. And it's quite painstaking. It's very laborious. It'd be much easier to draw freehand, but it would sacrifice half the orchestra would not be in tune. I just can't have that. Yeah. So it's laborious. Yeah.
So if I understand what you're saying, you use the grid that you draw on the canvas, and you sort of project that grid then as well, and you have to get those two grids to align with each other. Yeah, wow. I used to work in animation, and on big,
Oh,
huge,
wow, really? Yeah.
big, huge rostrum cameras. And we used to do this thing called rotoscoping, where you'd project up underneath it. You know, it's sort of like how they did Snow White. They like Snow White is rotoscope, meaning she moves like a
Oh,
person because they shot that actress moving, and then they drew each frame, and that's how. And then it
oh,
turned
wow.
into animation. But to get these two things to line up, we used to do exactly that. You'd have a one projection coming down from the camera, another projection coming off the thing. Really tricky optically to get them to line up. So it's funny that you do
Yes.
that exact same thing.
Yeah, and you know that book by David Hockney, um, in which he maintained, you know, that artists basically inevitably use whatever technology is available at any time in history, because why wouldn't they? They use whatever technology is available. So
Yeah.
the camera lucida and and so forth, you know, the early cameras,
Yeah.
Vermeer
Yeah. Yeah.
and so forth. And the thing is, all the rest of the process is such an ephemeral mix of emotion and form and gesture. It's so extremely ephemeral and delicate that I really need the other side of engineering to come in and lock it down, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So what do you like to paint on? Like what substrate do you like to paint on?
Uh, I only ever, I've just found what I like. And I don't use cotton because cotton is like a trampoline on a large canvas. I don't like that enormous spring. Um, I use Belgian linen, um, sealed with rabbit skin glue, and a couple of coats of alkyd primer, which seems to be acceptable now, and then a kind of wash. Actually, that is the color of my wash. That is the wash color. So I use this kind of brown, beige, green. It's quite Verdaccio in color, really, Raphael's color, as a ground for the entire thing. A big, thick coat of that color before I start work. Yeah.
Right.
And they're
So
like a
you're
drum, the paintings. Boing.
okay. So you never been inclined to work on boards or panels or aluminium panels or anything like that?
No, this is my chessboard. The game of chess is so complex for me that some things remain absolute constants, and this is my chessboard. The games are infinite, and I don't move the board stays the same. Yeah.
Do you actually play chess? Are you a chess player?
I have played chess quite badly, actually. What disheartened me was that by the time my children were 12, they were beating me. So, you know, it was disheartening. So,
Yeah. Yeah, I think I played chess up until I was about 18 or 19. And then I was playing with a friend of mine. And I just like, maybe like you, I'm not sure if I have the brain for it, meaning my brain doesn't process that far ahead, you know. But yeah, in this game, I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure I've got him now, you know. So I kind of moved a piece and I went, I think that's it. And he went, yeah, that's checkmate. I was like, what?
really, yes,
Yeah. And he had,
exactly.
yeah. So no, chess is not.
Aren't we easily disheartened? It's like, you know, someone says something slightly offensive to you, you know, really, that shirt doesn't quite go with it, you know, you immediately reach for the gun, you know, jump off a cliff. I can't stand it. I just can't stand it.
It was such a shock, though. I was so sure I was, you know, that was it. I'd beaten him, and I'd completely missed
Yes,
everything that he was doing. It was like, no, I'm not cut out for this
I
game.
know. Yeah, I'm not much of a strategist.
um, So when you start the painting, is there a grisaille monotone kind of phase to it, or are you full color straight away?
Well, I actually laid down the Verdaccio base, and I'll paint almost the entire thing in that Verdaccio base. Certainly the whole of the figure. But then I use layers and layers of glazes on top of that.
Right.
So there might be up to 10 glazes that go stacked on top of that. So I build up and build up on top of that base. So I suppose I kind of do, in a way. It's not grisaille in the strict sense of the word, because it's not grey, but, you know, it's the same principle, though. Yeah.
Goulash Dogan in Turkey says, does Edward Povey limit himself in the use of color in his paintings? And Paul Schulenberg in Massachusetts says, I'm curious to hear about the colors on your palette. There seems to be a limited range of color, and I'd like to know if you use a limited palette and what colors are included or excluded. There seems to be a very limited use of blue. Overall, it makes for a lovely harmony. So you've talked a little bit about your color palette, but if there's, would you like to add to it a bit there from those questions?
Those colors, and there are about 6 of them, that build the Raphael flesh color, basically, the Raphael Verdaccio. Those colors are very complicated, it turns out. Raphael made them from 3 colors, basically black, yellow, and white, but with pigments that we probably don't really use anymore now. So I've no idea what those would be, but they're very complex to make. So each of the 6 colors requires between 6 and 10 tubed colors to make that color. Then there are 6 of those colors, and then there are lots of other ranges that go on top in the form of glazes. So in the end, the color you're looking at, I wouldn't even know the name for it. I'd have no idea, you know, what that is in the end. And yet I do keep it very narrow. You know, color is really not my forte at all. It's not my forte, color chords. I struggle with color chords. And I've slowly learned to create acceptable color chords. It's not my forte. So, yeah. It's kind of interesting, really. You know, yeah.
No, go ahead. You go ahead.
Well, long ago, in about 1986 or 7, I was in the basement of a Belgian art dealer who I was going to exhibit with about a year later, Jan de Maar. And Jan was very patient with me because I knew almost nothing at the time. And he would cover up parts of paintings. His basement was completely filled with art. He would cover up a part of a painting and say, now tell me about what remains. And then he would take his hand away and say, now tell me what that color contributes exactly. And he said, you really need to go and study Vuillard. And I said, I'm sorry? And he said, Vuillard. And I said, I'm sorry, Jan, I don't know who that is. He said, you're an artist, you don't know who Vuillard is? That's astonishing. How do you know nothing? He was talking about Vuillard. So Vuillard and Bonnard. So it was a matter of pronunciation. But then I began to study the colorists of Maurice Denis and Vuillard and Bonnard and all those, and Vlaminck even. And that was where the knowledge of color to that extent grew. But I regard myself as limited in it.
Yeah. If I understand what you were saying about what the color, the 6 colors that you use, is that, you know, that 60 separate tubes of paint go to make up those colors, or it's each color is made of a mixture of the same 10 or 6 to 10?
Well, it's not as many as 60, but it's probably as many as 30 that
Wow.
make up the 6 colours. And it's only because they're so very specific. They have to go from warm shadows, from warm cracks to cold shadows, to warm lights, to cold highlights. They have to transit through that color architecture, and that makes them each have their own qualities, and in the end they're understandable.
Yeah.
But they're hard to
Well,
make. Yeah.
yeah, I can feel the collective shoulders of everyone listening sagging like, oh God. So could you, just for fun, if like as if you were a paint manufacturer and you were trying to come up with names for those 6 colors to try and convey, you know, what they are, just for someone listening, to give them a rough kind of idea of the general qualities of each of those 6 colors, so they can at least have a think about it and maybe, you know, do their own experimentation.
Well, I call them by very strange names. So the darkest color in my paintings are nowhere near black. They are way above black, and they're that brown. And I call it jacket, because the jackets have no detail in them, like in a photographer who chooses to lower the exposure sufficiently that you lose details in the shadows. My jackets are a single block of color.
Right.
But a single block of color with about 4 coats, 4 heavy coats, because I like it to be layered and deep and solid compared to the areas of flesh that are extremely delicate and layered with glazes. They're translucent like a pond, really.
Yeah.
So the jacket color, that is the darkest one. And the next one up I call crack, not because it has anything to do with street drugs, but because it
or fun in Ireland is called crack.
Really, is it?
Yeah.
Really,
oh, yeah.
is it?
Oh yeah, yeah. People will say, you know, how's the crack? People have got into trouble at customs in America for that.
Really?
Irish people.
How are you? What's that crack now? So
that's it. Yeah. Maybe Northern Ireland.
That's it. That's right, Northern Ireland. So I use the crack colours for the holes in the face. Basically, that's the tube, basically, but they're all used in combinations in any case. And then I go to a base shadow colour. And I actually was just kind of worrying. I don't know the name of that. Probably call it shade. I don't know. But it's kind of a blue, green, grey. And then I go to a khaki lights colour. And then there's the peppermint highlights. Now, there were another couple in between those colours, but I'm beginning to dispense with them. Those are actually sufficient. I can make all the colours of the base coat of the flesh from those.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and the highlight I just call highlight. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't go into paint manufacturing.
No,
those names are no, they're not romantic at all.
No, let's just paint the study with jacket.
Yeah, no. you're not going to last long on that sales meeting.
No.
So going back to Paul's question, though, are there any colors that are very consciously excluded? I mean, you said black. But are there, like he was saying that there's no blue, but from what you're saying, there is a bit of blue in there. But are there any colors that you're just like,
Yeah.
no, can't have those in?
Not consciously. No. No, not consciously. I don't consciously exclude any colours, but from my meeting in that basement with Yandamar all those years ago, I limit my colour very, very carefully, because as soon as it starts to rise in brightness, it starts to have a very nice intimate discussion with the other colours. And the more they rise in brightness of colour, the more arguments begin. So I keep my family of colours pretty quiet, partly because of the nature of my paintings. They're sufficiently emotional and sufficiently abrasive in their content that I actually keep the paintings themselves very sonorous intentionally, because I don't want them getting out of control. There has to be an element of control. Like, for example, a really powerful heavy metal song still has a given tempo and a given progression of chords, and the guitars are usually dead on in tune. So actually, under the structure, under the chaos and storm of the emotions of a heavy rock song, is a very precise structure and a controlled structure. Yeah. So that's what I do. I control
That's very
the structure.
good. Very good. I really like that thing. You don't want the voices to get so loud they start to argue with each other. That's beautiful.
Yeah, I mean, that thing about, like, you know, a really good rock band, I mean, they absolutely let the audience have it. But in rehearsal, and when they're preparing their instruments, they are very, very picky. They're really picky, like in the sense of, this has got to be absolutely in tune, hold that back during this break, you know, only this drum, we want those volumes. No, that volume is too high, pull that back a little, let that go just a little bit, and you can go there, but you can't go here. It is an unbelievable kind of extreme government inside what looks like an absolute revolution.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Isn't that funny?
Yeah. That's brilliant. Laura Atkins again says, what medium or mediums do you use?
Oil, basically. I use oil, and all the glazes are Damar glaze medium.
And when you say oil, you
that's
mean
more or less it. It's very
linseed
simple.
oil or walnut oil, or what kind of oil do you use?
It's linseed oil, but I keep it very, very simple, because I like the paint relatively thick. So I don't thin any of my paint. And the glaze medium is neat. It is pure Damar glaze medium, homemade, because it's very specific, with stand oil and purified turpentine and Damar crystals and all of that, and dryers, cobalt dryers. So it's all very specific, because in the making of the painting, it's so kind of vast, it's so complicated, that I keep the materials extremely simple and reliable.
Yeah.
Do
you have a brand of paint that you use exclusively, or do you use a mix of brands to get the colors you want?
I use a mix of brands, but not because I want to. It's that brands do change over time, And right now, I'm not particularly happy with any brand. I'm not. The quality of the paint, I'm not thrilled with the paint that I'm using at the moment. So I'm in transition. You know.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing you've tried them all.
I've tried a lot. Yeah. Yeah, I've experimented. Yeah.
All right. Do you have a favorite type or make of brush or palette knife that you like to use?
I wouldn't even know the names of them actually, John. I mean, I like using flats, they're square-ended brushes. I like flats, but I use so many brushes. I mean, dozens, probably hundreds actually. And I don't even know the make of them, other than that I'm a regular customer at Cornelison's in London. They're a very old kind of artist supplies place. But yeah, that's about it really. And I wear my brushes out. I literally wear them out.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you use a palette knife at all when you're painting?
Not in the paintings, no. I use loads of palette knives just for work on the palette, but and I have my favorites. You know that thing where you wind up with things that just they seem to fit your hand. They just work. Yeah. It's like that.
Yeah. How do you check yourself as you're working? Like some artists will use a mirror, or they'll turn the canvas upside down, or they'll take photos on their phone, or they'll squint, or they'll get their friends in to give them some feedback. What are the sort of things that you do to check yourself as you're going along?
I have done all of those things, but I can't entirely judge a painting until it's basically covered. And then I kind of walk around wringing my hands and looking at it from the back of the studio. And I kind of really, I agonize, and I walk around, and I, put my head on one side and I look at it, and I worry, and then I leave the room. And one of my favorite times is first thing in the morning. I'll come into the room and look at the painting in whatever light happens to be coming through half-closed shutters and these thin, pale curtains. Whatever happens in this dim lighting, I'll stand and look at the painting in my pajamas, in that dim lighting, and it helps. And if I'm struggling with it, I'll go away. I'll go away. After a bit of a struggle, I'll leave. Because when I come back, I can understand it quite often. I use time, I find. And sometimes for a week, I won't understand a painting. But then one day, I'll walk in and I'll understand it.
Yeah, that's lovely.
They go through a long process. I sometimes have a painting hanging around for a couple of months, not entirely happy with it, until I solve it. In the end, I solve it. I won't let one go until it's solved. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Vincent Desiderio said exactly the same thing about that kind of light.
Really, does he?
Yeah, the obscured
he's so
light.
sweet. He's a very great painter.
Yeah, he is. He's lovely. He didn't say about the pajamas. I think they're optional, but the light,
I think the
pretty much exactly the same.
Important part of this, actually.
Are they?
Very important. Very, yes. So yeah, that's it. Really, they trouble me a lot, and I absolutely love them. The paintings, they trouble me terribly. Yeah, I couldn't live without them.
Yeah. Now, If you're thinking to yourself, God, I'm really enjoying this podcast. I've listened to a few now and they're brilliant. And there's so many of them. And I've learned so much from listening to them. And you know what? If I met that John Dalton fella in real life, I'd love to buy him a cup of tea and have a chat with him. I'd love to do that every month if I could. Well, now you can. The tea part at least, because this podcast runs on cups of tea bought for me by people like you who listen to the podcast and send me the price of a cup of tea once a month through the Patreon account. That's patreon.com/John Dalton Gently Does It, all one word. And if you're one of those people who already send me cups of tea through Patreon, thanks a million. The tea is lovely and I really appreciate it. Now, the great thing is that if you can't afford to send me the price of a cup of tea or you don't want to, that's fine. You still get exactly the same podcast for free. It's sort of an honor system where the people who can afford it and want to pay for the people who can't or don't want to. So it's all lovely. So if you'd like to send me a cup of tea once a month, you can do that through Patreon. I'd really appreciate it. It makes a huge difference to me. What is your varnishing preference?
We had quite a few discussions actually with the Smithsonian Museum conservators, and they said at the moment that Gamvar seemed to be leading the pack. But, you know, varnish is very problematic. And it's problematic because the function of a varnish is to go onto a painting and collect all the dirt and atmospheric stuff and protect it from that, and then to be removed at the moment within 20 years. So 20 years is a good length of time for a painting. But then the varnish must be removed, because if it's not removed on a molecular level, it starts to make friends with the paint. It starts to wed the paint and become immovable. Its whole function is to be removable. Any proper picture varnish has to be removable. So it's problematic because the best they've gotten is 20 years, and that's Gamvar, as far as I know so far. And it's not perfect. It's okay.
Right.
But it's not perfect. And often paintings, very often, go way over their 20 years. So now they have a permanent varnish along with all the atmospheric dirt and everything else.
Yeah. Is your preference for high gloss kind of varnish or matte?
Matte tends to dull the darkest tones, which is bad because it unbalances the painting. Gloss tends to be quite hard to light because it's so reflective. And so I've found the best compromise at the moment is a kind of satin.
Right.
More or less satin, because and all it really is a compromise, and then it comes down to the quality of the lighting on the painting.
Yeah. What kind of lighting setup do you have in your studio?
I have a mixture of tungsten and LED, and I like lighting that is, for one thing, a lot of light. And I've got a warehouse light LED. It's a vast amount of light. You can't look at it. I bounce it off the ceiling, off a white ceiling. Behind my paintings, behind my easel, I have black felt, an entire wall of black felt, so that the painting is not unbalanced by what's around it.
Yeah.
Then I have a vast wash of LED and tungsten that is even, very even, and non-reflective, and that seems to work for me. I like that, and the important thing is that I paint usually many of my waking hours until 10 or 11 at night, sometimes later, every day, and so I really need lighting that will allow me to paint around the clock.
Yeah. And does that wash of light include your palette, or do you have a separate light for your palette?
Yeah, it pretty much lights the palette. Yeah, the same light really on the palette.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
What, if anything, do you listen to as you work?
I find that good stories, good audiobooks, and interviews with artists and with actors and directors mainly, I find that uses a part of my brain that my painting doesn't use. So that does it for me. That works quite well. I like it. I can listen to them, but then when I'm decision making, I can't. So I have to do this decision making in silence, but then I'll put them on. Occasionally music. Yeah.
Very good. Laura Atkins again says, are you a team standing while painting or team sitting while painting?
I do both actually, John. Some days, sometimes for a week, I'll stand, and for a week I might sit. Depends how I'm feeling, really. Yeah. I quite like the active quality of standing. I think I paint more slowly when I'm sitting, actually. Yeah.
How do you name your paintings?
I have to name them obscurely. So I intentionally name them so that the name is not prescriptive. I don't want the name to prescribe what people will think it means. Because like I said way back, I do not instill very specific meanings, or I don't. The paintings go on their own way and they develop a kind of meaning that truly cannot be put into words, or certainly not by me anyway. So the names are intentionally very obscure. And if they're too easily interpreted, I'll turn them into French, put them into a French language, or Dutch. And I've used other languages as well, Italian on some occasions, in order to skew them off in another direction. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Of course, then I pity the French and Dutch and Italians, because they will get more of a prescriptive name.
Oh, so. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, there it goes.
Yeah. You could make up your own language.
I could. But the trouble is, that wouldn't just be obscure, it would be meaningless. But then, of course, I don't want meaning. So there it is. So maybe I should. You're right. I probably should
maybe
invent names for them.
Hey, you could put them in Irish. Very few people are going to know what that is.
That is true. That is true.
Small little
That's
parts
an
of Ireland.
interesting thought, actually.
Just make sure you never show in these little parts of Ireland, and you'll be set.
That's it. They've got to be pronounceable, though. They have to be visually pronounceable by most people.
Irish is not good for that.
The same with Welsh. With Welsh, same thing. All those L's, that would be a problem. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, BH in Irish is pronounced V. So when you see it written,
really?
You wouldn't be able to pronounce it. Yeah.
No, I never knew that. Wow.
Yeah, like the Irish name Siobhan is spelled Siobhan, a father N actually.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a completely different use of the alphabet. Yeah.
Yeah, well, the language came first, and then the alphabet came afterwards. I think so. Yeah.
Well, yes. Yeah.
Now, Sandra Manzi in the UK says, Edward, I noticed you keep your drawing showing through in some of your paintings. What makes you decide when to leave parts of a painting unfinished like this? Do you paint in one layer? And why are hands so prominent in your work?
Actually, this painting behind me is a pretty good example of the drawing showing through. And I actually do not draw as thoroughly underneath the painting, but I want it to look like the drawing that lies behind the painting. So it is contrived in that way. But the reason I want it there is because I theorized that in the same way that human beings are always in the process of becoming, they are never complete. They are always growing and changing and in a process. So I decided, I would like the paintings to have that same thing, that same partially undressed quality to them. Partially undressed. So I've done that in quite a lot of paintings, and I know I'll come back to it. But it is problematic because the paintings are already quite complex, and to introduce two mediums is problematic. I think I've resolved it in the paintings I've used it in, like this one, but it does have its problems, yeah. And at the moment, I'm handling other complex ideas, and so I can't now handle this at the moment. So it's pushed to one side for the moment. And then hands, I feel that hands are the almost all human acts are done with hands. Hands are hugely important to me. They're like the extension of our will and intention, aren't they? They're the extension of our being. So I probably enlarge them. Yeah.
Tom Elton on Instagram says, change in studio locations for good periods of time is interesting. How does it help and why?
Changing studio locations. That sounded rather Australian, really, didn't it? Changing studio locations. That's right. I like to just move around, basically. So, know what I mean? So,
go and walk about. Yeah.
Well, that's right. I'm just loving this. This is great. So these moving studio, yeah. I was having too much fun, really. So it's very disruptive to my work. I hate moving studio because it completely disrupts my work for a long time. I don't like it. I settle in and everything finds its place, and I know where all the tools are. Otherwise, it's like a pilot going onto a plane and all the tools, all the controls are in different places. It's very upsetting. So I don't like it. But as a human being, I like change. So I actually like going to other countries and different interesting cultures and locations. I find that very stimulating. It's really rather great. Yeah. So the short answer is it doesn't help at all, but it helps me as a human being. Yeah. And every studio has its problems, of course, doesn't it?
Yeah. But I think I saw in another interview that you did that you were saying, because the person was kind of going, oh, does it inspire you being in these other places? And you were going, no, because my work is so internal, it really wouldn't matter where I was, but I get stimulated. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right, really. That's right. Where I am in the world doesn't really have any effect on the paintings I make because it's the human emotional experience of being alive and our mortality and vulnerability. That is what interests me very much. But as a human being, what feeds me is a certain amount of chaos in my life. The two things are at odds, I feel.
Yeah.
I like a very stable lifestyle as a painter. But as a painter, I like a certain amount of chaos and abrasiveness in my life because then I feed on that material for my work. So, yeah.
Yeah. I've heard
A
that
contradiction.
described as dynamic tension.
Yes.
Robert Fritz. I interviewed Robert
Yeah.
Fritz years ago, and he's big into dynamic tension. But he was describing it as the dynamic tension is the arc that starts with the idea for a painting and ends when the painting is complete, and in between, you're dynamically tense the whole time until it's done. You know.
Yeah. That's a good expression, actually. And that does definitely describe when a painting is in process, which there is one in the studio right now in process. Uh, that is, there is a constant tension of ongoing challenges and problems. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Laura Atkins again says, would you expound on the unfortunate theft of your magical and mesmerizing mural, The Trial of Saint Daniel? And Michael Stratham in
Daniel.
the UK says, how do you pronounce it?
Oh, Daniel. Yeah, Saint Daniel.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Daniel.
yeah,
Michael
yeah.
Stratham in the UK says, I have to ask the obvious question. How long did it take you to create the humongous Trial of Saint Daniel? It's stunning.
Saint Daniel, yeah.
Daniel. And Gareth Roberts in East Sussex, originally from Snowdonia. He said all this. It says, I'm fascinated by the strange story surrounding Ed Povey's incredible panel painting, The Trial of Saint Daniel. The painting was apparently stolen by a collector in the US. How did this actually happen? What circumstances was the painting in that led to this loss? And how do you feel about it today? So a couple of questions all around that painting.
Yeah. I feel bad about it, actually. It is the strangest story. Some paintings seem to just be like a magnet for extraordinary stories. So this one, it was commissioned by a lawyer in Wales who was actually a lovely guy. He was disbarred later. I don't know why. He did something. But anyway, really, really nice guy. And very sweet. And he had a building with 19 different rooms. And he said, well, really, I just want something to, paintings for the rooms. I said, sure. But I decided to turn them into one enormous painting that would never be seen together. All the 19 panels would be in all the different rooms. And you'd have one photograph in the entrance hall of the complete painting. And you'd only ever see parts of it. But as soon as he saw the painting as a whole, he said, oh, no, this has to be seen as a whole. Well, there was going to be Art Expo in New York. And I asked him, why don't we take it there? It's interesting. And he was headed for a divorce and said, I wouldn't mind selling it. So I took it. And the guy that came to photograph the painting was Dith Pran, who was the famous New York Times reporter whose life is documented in, I think it's the Killing Fields.
Wow.
I think it's the Killing Fields. He was the Cambodian that was sent to a labor camp. And he later escaped. The Khmer Rouge had him in a labor camp, really, really extreme stuff. he was the sweetest man. He came along and photographed it and talked to me, and so that was remarkable. And then I put it into storage with one of my collectors. And later, in the divorce, the actual ownership was passed to a surveyor in Wales, a surveyor or architect in Wales, something like that. Again, a lovely man. And suddenly my friend and collector in the States said, well, if you want to have your painting back, this will now cost $30,000 in storage fees. Everyone said, what? And so the lovely architect had nothing like that kind of money, so it languished over there, and around Bangor in North Wales, neither the university nor the town council had the wherewithal or the particular interest to get the painting of their patron saint back. And ultimately, the collector in the States said, well, I'm going to take it from you. It's mine now. And because I don't technically have ownership, I don't easily have any means of getting it back. It seems such a shame. It's been in a crate for its entire life. Since the early 1980s, it's been in a crate. Isn't that extraordinary? What a strange story.
Yeah. So the collector who stole it, they started off as a friend and someone you knew.
Yeah, a good friend. Yeah.
Wow.
Very sad, really.
Yeah, that it's not seen.
Makes an interesting story, though, doesn't it? I think it would be an interesting book, actually. But I think there's a final chapter to this story that hasn't happened yet.
When you described the original idea for it, it reminded me, I remember attending, I used to do script writing, and I remember when I was learning, I attended this lecture by this Hollywood scriptwriter guy, and he said, writing scripts is like making stained glass windows. And we were like, okay. He said, if you think of life, like real life, as being one big pane of glass, you can't make a movie of that because it would last, the length of a day or a life. So it's like we smash up the glass and then we pick out the glistening fragments and we put those together, and that's the story, so that you can tell a story about someone's whole life in an hour and a half because you're just doing these fragments. And when you were saying about the idea for the painting being like it's one painting but it's in all these different rooms, immediately that guy came back into mind of that idea of fragmentation.
Yeah. And what a strange story. And there are other characters in this story as well, but as you say.
And like, are you technically you don't own it anymore? Like nobody owns it except that guy or that person who says, well, I'm owning it because it's in my storage and you kind of have to take it from me. Yeah. So it's almost like it's kind of fallen into the gaps between owners, it feels like.
It has, yes. But, I might be able to organize a hit squad or something. Or the FBI, I am actually going to put it in the hands of the FBI, actually. Because technically, it's a stolen painting, so.
Yeah.
And it's international now because he lives in the Caribbean, so I'm going to put it in their hands.
Does he? Yeah. I think it depends. I think if it's in a free port, you'll have trouble getting anybody to get access to it. But if he has it on a sovereign soil like America or something like that, then maybe you could get them involved.
He does.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, you'll just have to come back on when that story it gets to the next
Finally,
chapter.
Its last
and
chapter.
Tell us.
Yes.
Yeah, tell us.
Yeah, I know. These weird things.
Yeah. But then it's funny, like of of there's lots of people that would be a very unusual thing, but you've had a very unusual kind of life. Like when you were talking about moving to the Caribbean, you sort of left out the fact that you were in the middle of a revolution when you did that.
I was, that is true, yes. I mean, we were there for, I think, 2 months. And then suddenly it was a shoot on sight curfew and bombing.
Yeah,
And we were
because it was
driving through
Grenada you were in,
curfews.
wasn't it?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh dear.
yeah. So, and then similarly, what you were saying about being in Israel when Lebanon was gone off, and so in the context of,
Yeah.
it's sort of, if anyone's going to have that story, you're the man for the job, Edward.
The man for the job. And
Yeah.
then I was in Texas when Trump came to power,
Okay.
living in Texas for 11 years when Trump came to power, and that was interesting. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sheila Horowitz on Patreon. Thanks for the tea. Sheila says, you use the synthetic cubism device of tipping the perspective for various things, and I know that it's given it's you doing it. There must be a philosophical reason, and I wonder why. It seems foundational to understanding your work. Is it to bring us to a purer geometric forms of circle and square, or are you forcing us to see afresh? Because you only do it sometimes. You force us to see life's rules as arbitrary. Is that your premise?
That's really interesting, actually, isn't it?
Yeah.
I like that whole chain of thought. I find that very interesting.
Yeah.
The maybe it does appear to be a sort of synthetic cubism. Well, I suppose it is in the sense that it is a synthesis. It is a mixed perspective. I think of it as being pre-Brunelleschi, early Renaissance religious art kind of perspective. In other words, before there was such a thing as linear perspective.
Yes.
But the reason for it is twofold. And I think the short answer to that question is yes. Very
Great. Moving
complex
on.
question. Yes. I should have just let you complete the question and said yes. Next. So I think what it is I want to tip the tables up and the floor to the canvas to give the honesty of the canvas. The canvas is flat, and I want it to be plausible. So I flatten my floors and tables, horizontal surfaces, against the canvas to create that flatness so that they are, in that sense, honest. But then I completely lie when it comes to the figures, because the figures are seen from one perspective for the most part. And then I lie again with the crockery, because the crockery is often seen from two perspectives, where you can see into the cup and you can see the side of the cup. So I want an underlying honesty, and as she points out, a strength of composition, simple elements of composition, because I believe there is a lot of strength in that. But then what I do is I go to great lengths to really lie about it, because then I want the emotional charge of the objects in the painting, like the knives, the bone-handled knives that my father brought home from the war to my mother, the letters of people that have died or lovers that are being pushed away. I want those reproduced very, very faithfully. And I want the detritus of underwear and spilled tea, the mess of a very ordinary, untidy emotional life. And also the mess of a very ordinary, untidy skin that has lived and felt and is mortal and will one day die. So there are different types of honesty. Surfaces that claim to be honest by flattening themselves against the canvas, and objects that claim to be honest in their authenticity of appearance, that they're scrupulously copied, but only really to pass the emotions that they carry to the viewer. And the skin also, actually, which brings me to something. When my models pose, I coach them extremely. I know what I need, and I literally move hair behind their ears. I adjust a strap. I'll manipulate their fingers. I'll say, can you push your head further? I'll adjust some fabric, and I'll say, now from this position, what I want you to do is, what are your earliest regrets? What are the things you wished you could have done differently? Or when was the very first time that you were completely betrayed? And can you go to that now? So lose this place and go there and be with that event. So the color drops out of their face and they go there, and in their eyes you can see that they are back in that time and that event. And that is when I photograph them. So I'm bringing a whole range of intense reality into the painting, necessarily mixed with different types of honesty. And that is my only way of putting it all together to convey a human life. Yeah.
Wow.
That's sort of it. Yeah.
Do you find you go through a lot of models? I have this feeling of them staggering out of the session going, oh my God, that was so distressing. I'm never going back to model for him again.
Well, weirdly, it's very intense. It's very hard work. Because sometimes they're shaking, they can't hold it. They have to have a rest. And then we start again and so forth. But here's the strange thing. I mean, it's very intense because I'm about, could you crack your mouth, let your mouth go, let it fall open naturally. Now go to that place emotionally. And while they're doing that, I need to get a finger correct again and push their hair back again and pull their shoulders slightly to one side. It's not matching the design. So it's very, very hard work. But they leave always saying, oh my God, that was so interesting. You know, whenever you want me to do it again, I'm more than happy to do it. And I send them the photographs of the paintings that result from those sessions. And they're so kind. They just love it. They love it. It's like sending them into history. And actually, I have to tell you, yeah, there was this lovely girl in Tehran who was literally locked down in the pandemic, literally didn't leave her apartment for 2 years. Supplies were brought. She couldn't leave. She had to be there. She got terribly depressed. And I had seen a picture of her with her head almost shaved before that. But for 2 years, she couldn't get a photographer to photograph her because of the restrictions in Tehran. And then finally, the moment the restrictions were lifted, she shaved her head. She literally shaved all her hair off, and it was, this long. And she shaved it all off completely and came out to me and said, Edward, I'm ready. And I've got a photographer, I'm ready. And I wasn't prepared really. And I was so honored, so honored. I mean, this girl, and she's had a very, very difficult life. And later in the process, we translate everything from English to Farsi so that she can understand. We go back and forth between English and Farsi. And so in the end, she said, "This is so important to me. It's more important than you can ever imagine because I want to have existed. I want to have existed." She wanted to be in something that would go on after her because she wants to have lived, to have existed. She wants it as proof that she was here. Isn't that the most extraordinary thing?
Yeah. Sad.
So touching.
Yeah.
Sad and in a way courageous and beautiful. Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah, well, it's kind of, it occurred to me when you were talking about capturing humanity, this thing of like, really all I can ever do is have a sense of what is going on for other people, like a sense of humanity. Like, and anything I would make would be, well, this is my inner experience, and all going well, it communicates. But like once I start to look outside myself, it's I'm guessing really, because I don't look out of anybody else's eyes. I don't have their experience. And like why I'm saying it's kind of sad for me is that like the idea of something going beyond you is, unless you believe in an afterlife and that kind of thing, which is fine, but just in terms of direct experience, like it seems she's very removed from her own experience of living, that, you know, to sort of feel like that strongly, that like, I want to have something that goes on beyond me, when she'll never experience that. She'll never experience it going beyond me, going beyond her. You know what I mean? Like, even like anything we make, like we won't, all we have is the idea of like, well, this will be here after I'm gone, but I won't be here. You know, I won't have the experience of afterwards, you know?
No. I suspect that memory is a vastly important thing, and that we are so ephemeral. We're such passing creatures that time rushes by and sweeps us away, making way for others. But to die might seem to be bad enough, but to be forgotten, to be lost to memory, would feel like being buried beneath Arctic ice, infinitely deep, to be truly, truly lost. Memory is so important, I think. And, you know, when she is gone, her face as a relatively young woman will be turning in this painting, locked in position, her hands still gesturing, her eyes still making tears, still reaching out of a painting somewhere in the world, left back in this world, still crying. There's a kind of extraordinary comfort in leaving that, I think.
Yeah, well, that sort of speaks to that thing about archetypes, because I've noticed recently that, you know, if I'm watching something, you know, a film, you know, like a historic film, and I'm getting all involved in it, and I'm like, oh, are they going to make it? Are they going to make it through this thing, whether it's an illness or their, you know, the conflict that is in films? And I've noticed myself going, Yeah, even if they make it through, they're all dead now. There's a very like there's no happy ending. Even if there's a happy ending, they're all gonna die. They're all dead now. And it's kind of like, yeah, but
Yes.
we love the archetype of the hero and we love the archetype of the heroine or the, whatever it is, the ideal of the young person, the young body, the young man, the young woman, whatever it is, the child, all these different, those kind of archetypes. So when you were talking about that woman and what she will become is an archetype, of a certain age, a certain woman, a certain tier, a certain expression, and we'll relate to that because you can see it when you look at like paintings from the Renaissance, or
Yes.
just historic paintings. It's like, yeah, there was a person, particularly with
Yeah.
Van Dyck, where everyone's a little bit ugly and a little bit hairy and a little bit, weird looking and very relatable,
Yes.
you kind of go,
Yes.
yeah, that was a person. That person had aspirations and dreams, and they've become frozen in time. But there's that who they are travels through time. The young woman, the
Yes.
young man. It's always the same.
Yes, that is true. Yes, it locks it there for all time, in a sense. Even the paintings have a time limit, but certainly a longer time than us. We are very brief.
We are.
That interests me very much. It's that exact mortality that I find so filled with pathos and also beauty. The impermanence is beautiful in a way. It's probably what endows it with beauty, its impermanence.
Yeah. Yeah, like I often think like we think we're really solid, but really we're music. We're a song that starts and goes along and ends. And it is, as you
Yes.
say, very ephemeral. We
Yeah.
just sort of think we're solid.
Yeah. Yeah. We have the beauty of the gift of feeling permanent for a while.
Yeah,
Isn't that a funny phrase? Feeling
yeah.
permanent for a while.
Well, I think that's the nature of the song that we are, because at the beginning it's a lot of action, like when fertilization occurs, and we become 2 cells and 4 and 8 and so on. It's like dramatic and it's very exciting, and then it starts to slow down as you're born but you're growing, you're a child, you're changing, whatever. And then once we kind of reach adulthood, we sort of think the song stops, but it doesn't. It just is very slowly changing, um, but when we're in that kind of adult thing, we think, oh no, this is it now. I'm solid. I've arrived. I'm here. The song stopped when I
Yes.
became whatever, 20 or 21 or whatever. But it doesn't. It keeps going. And I think as you get older, you notice, oh yeah, there's changes. They're just happening more slowly, but I'm changing. And you can see that the
Yeah. And
natural
it's not just the
conclusion of that
body, is
song
it?
is you're going to, yeah, it's
Yeah.
not just the body. Yeah.
The final act never ends very well, but the final act of the play. But as Anthony Hopkins says, no, it's not. It's Leonard Cohen says that the final act never ends very well. But um, actually, here's the interesting thing. Yes, our bodies age and our bodies ultimately die. But one of the paradoxes of that is I have found that I didn't really know much until late in my life. I'm only starting to know a few things relatively recently. And I like that. I mean, I feel pretty much the same way as I felt when I was 18, physically. I do. I look rather different, more complicated, as Bill Nye says, but I look more complicated. Or he says I'm more complicated to look at. But
So what things do you know
But
now?
That's an interesting question. I suppose I know that the only way to make art is to never intend to, but to have a human experience that involves art materials.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
That's a good knowing.
And it is. And I suppose I know that being kind is more important than almost anything.
Did you really not know that before? You seem like that's part of your DNA, though, Edward. You just seem like a person who's naturally kind. I can't imagine you not being kind, and I, just met you.
Well, I was going to say that's very kind of you to say, but but I guess I've increasingly realised the importance of kindness. I mean, I have as the years have gone by, I've got more and more and more empathy because I've realised increasingly that people have the same extraordinary mixture of sadness and delight that I have for the most part. And you look into the eyes of virtually anyone, the girl that works at the supermarket, the man sitting in a car next to you at a traffic light. We are very, very similar. And that our misdemeanors are unbelievably irrelevant. And to truly live while we can, really, really live, really open our eyes and live. Yeah, just a few things that seem terribly important.
Yeah, that's lovely. Yeah. Okay. Alan Reed on Instagram says, I've always liked to see your work for the contrast between 2D interpretation of space and 3D modeling. Intuition done with great care. Do you think Picasso went too far?
Oh, I don't think so. I mean, most artists work within a genre. They settle down and get comfortable in the armchair of a genre, you might say. I've built my armchair from the armchairs of several genres. An arm from here, an arm for this other genre, and the back of it from another genre. So I've rebuilt, but only from existing genres. But there are very few artists that actually invent genres. And Picasso was just that, the inventor of genres. And I think it goes with the territory. I don't think it's possible to say that he went too far simply because that was his nature. His nature was to destroy and rebuild in interesting new ways, opening new doors and avenues for humanity, really. And yeah. My conclusion about my mixed perspectives is that it is the only way I can do it at the moment. It's the only workable way of doing what I need to do. And I've really, really, like a chess game that you can't work out, I've really looked for other moves very carefully. Day and night, I write and think about other ways to do what I'm currently doing. And at the moment, I can't think of any.
Okay.
However, I do know what happens next. I've got a concept next that yet to be revealed, and also yet to be worked out. But I know what it's moving towards, kind of.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, Eileen Kennedy says, I've been looking at Mr. Povey's work for the past several days. First, those that John has posted. Thank you so much, John. You're welcome. And then on his website. I can only say that I've been gobsmacked, in inverted commas. I can't remember being so impacted by art, and I've been involved in the field for 50 years. I promise to turn this into a question eventually. in looking at the trajectory of your exquisitely painted images, I'm seeing a move towards a portrayal of grief or some other deep-seated anguish. When I look at the pieces with sections unpainted, I have a sense that we're seeing beneath the skin or behind the veneer. These pieces feel like extremely complex memento mori. There are remnants of meals, or the tea is spilled. In others, the paint is worn off the blue chair to reveal the wood underneath, and the enamel is chipped over from the overhead lamp. But then those little paper doves shine in hopeful light on the scene, but not always. Can you speak about how your work speaks of the fragility of our physical reality? Even if I've totally missed the mark, these are astounding works.
That is so lovely, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's so kind of her. Is that Eileen?
Eileen Kennedy,
is so,
yeah.
Eileen, that's so kind of you, Eileen. Thank you. And I think that when anyone, the phrase, convince a man against his will and he will disbelieve you still. I think when anyone comes and has a theory about my work, my inclination is to always agree with them. Always agree with them, whether I can see it or not. Because the only way to change their interpretation of the work is to go back and try to change the life that they had that led to their current interpretation of it. Because just like when you buy Volkswagen, all of a sudden you see Volkswagens everywhere. People's lives, people's lives lead them to see selectively. So they see, in a way, what they see internally, they see externally in the paintings. So I never talk them out of it. From my perspective, and I said it in a different way earlier on, but when you embrace someone, what you're holding between your arms is the girl that held the finger of her father when she was a toddler, and the terrible betrayals and the loves and her sexual feelings and the grief of losses and her longings. You hold all of it. You hold all of it. Circled in your arms is everything she has been, and probably the seeds of all that she will be. It's everything. And that is what my paintings are. They're not one thing at all. They are all the components. And yes, there is a fragility in human life, but there's also a phenomenal and inexplicable resilience as well. Human beings are unbelievably enduring, aren't they?
Yeah.
Really extraordinary creatures. I mean, I know, quite often people point out the evils of this world and say, how is that humanly possible? How can they have possibly done that? Well, that is true. That makes you wonder. And then on the other side, there are things that human beings have done for each other for others, like Nelson Mandela, for example, like Gandhi, but many other ordinary people whose names we don't know, that have done things that are beyond all imagining. Goodness extends beyond all imagining. So circled in your arms, you have the capacity for both. So much. So I don't try to constrain it in the paintings. I show human beings. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So beautiful. What you were saying there at the beginning about how we all see through the lens of our past experience, and that is so true. And sometimes I can it's very hard to see that lens, because
yes, isn't it?
I've
It's the
lived through it,
fishbowl, isn't it?
yeah, but sometimes you can get a feeling for it. You can sort of see it. It's almost out of the corner of your eye. Do you actively
Yes.
do anything to help break down those structures in yourself so that you can see things with more of a wide angle rather than a narrow focus of the past?
I don't know really, and I'm sure I'm as limited as anyone else. And I have seen a lot of very extraordinary things, very astonishing human beings. And it's all contributed. I've seen such a wide range of heart-rendingly loving people. Just it slays you to consider how they live and what they do. And also astonishing and absurd deaths in the most ridiculous ways. Inexplicable, completely bizarre. And I have lists of them. It's the most incredible thing. One of my collectors from Washington State, an absolutely lovely man. He'd finally given up alcohol, and his first marriage has ended in his life, and he was well known in his field. And then he met the love of his life. It was absolutely phenomenal. And he went to help. He was a professor of communicable disease, and he went to help nurses in Botswana and was there coaching nurses just for no pay, so as to take this knowledge of communicable disease to Botswana. And they were about to be married. No, this was their honeymoon. And he was on a boat on a river tour, and he was snatched out of a boat by a crocodile. His wife was in the boat behind and saw it all, and they found his head a week later.
Oh.
I mean, I have known countless situations of extraordinary, bizarre. Life is so staggeringly absurd.
Yeah.
And he would have found that very funny, actually. I mean, clearly it has its dark side, but he was the kind of guy that would have found that very poetic.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah, so completely incredible.
Yeah. Okay, Juan Nira on Instagram says, hello, I would like to know if time is a dimension in painting in general and in your work specifically. Being being that a painting is flat, how do you treat the subject of time without movement? How can one express time without even the illusion of movement? Thank you.
I think that the stillness in paintings and sculptures, I suppose. Of course, now there are art forms like video and various things that do have time and progression. Of course, music always had that time and progression, but tempo. But paintings, for the most part, and sculptures are basically still. And I try to remove anything out of my paintings that is time bound or too tightly time bound. So I find it very hard to find good models. I only have 3 or 4 of them at the moment, and they're around the world: Texas, Vancouver, London, Tehran. That's about it. And they're all over the world and very, very hard to find, because I want them and their faces to have a timeless quality and a liminal quality where they are seen not in the act of doing things, but between acts, in those loops of time between specifics. So timelessness is what I'm interested in, because I'm interested in the qualities of human life that are not time bound, but which occur in a kind of continuum. They endure timelessness. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So you, like in answering his question, you get over, or you deal with time by aiming for timelessness, and then that. So you're not really trying to express time. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to be anything but specific about a time period or even an event or a moment.
But
I try to avoid them at all costs. Yeah.
Yeah, I seem to remember in one of your interviews you were talking about, like you've mentioned it as well, about having each object has to have an emotional charge to it, but that some things need to look old and they need to be aged. And if it doesn't look the right age, that you'll age it so that it has that particular quality. Is that part of that time aspect of time?
It might be linked to time, but that is more linked to emotion, that I want a letter to be very, very emotionally authentic. The actual words seen in the painting. In the recent paintings, there's been a little bit of blood in the recent paintings. Somewhere in the painting, there is some blood. Like in a recent painting, Congé Diamant, the painting, there's a little strip of meat on the side of the saucer leaking blood into the tea, which of course is about, mortality, the fact that we are made of meat, basically. But it's my blood. I had it drawn by a doctor. So in other words, everything in the painting is chosen very carefully to be very close to home, emotionally and intense.
Yeah.
So the specificness of them is so as to convey an emotional charge, but not one that is seen to be linked to a known event or time, but all very authentic. And the kind of life I see with behind the figures is, as I said, is that untidy, kind of discarded quality about ordinary human life in limited surroundings. Yeah.
Welsh Yogi on Instagram, I'm guessing he's from Wales, says, would you ever return to North Wales to show your latest works?
I don't entirely get to decide that. I kind of go where I'm called. in a sense. And at the moment, my gallery is in New York, and they're showing in various places, but I do get invitations. And so yeah, I'm invited. So I certainly wouldn't say no, but I'd have to have a really good invitation. Have to be a good invitation, strategically speaking. Yeah.
Okay. Maria Gisela Battencourt again says, I believe that you have little free time, but have you ever thought about taking your writing to another level, namely publishing a book?
I love writing. And I've always loved writing. I've written since I was a child. Stories and poetry and ideas, and it's really important in my paintings as well. You know, in the evolution of ideas, it often just turns more or less into poetry or prose. Into prose, really. It turns into quite, you could say, poetic prose. But time is always my limitation, and I actually wrote a novel when I was in my 20s, but it taught me enough about writing novels to know that it would require an entire life devoted to it to do a good job of it. Mm-hmm. And so I've had to choose. And a lot of people have been saying in the last few years that they would really like to see a book, and that would require a publisher to come along and say, all right, let's do it. I don't have the time to instigate it. So time is my problem. Yeah.
Well, just as an aside, it sounds like if you just you could very easily make a book out of your studio diary. I think that's a book a lot of people would like to read.
Yeah, that would be interesting. It's very frank, actually. It's very frank. I talk about my influences and talk in terms that no one could possibly understand sometimes, and sometimes it's engineering and dynamics and numbers and calculations, and it's everywhere. So everything, really. The studio diary is everything. Yeah.
Volume 1, volume 2. You know, could be like the Encyclopedia
Britannica. That's right. Yes. Yeah, it would make strange reading, John. It really would.
How did you balance parenthood with being an artist?
Badly, in my opinion. It's one of my regrets. It's one of the problems, isn't it? Is that to really do something well requires a level of devotion, a level of obsession, really, that excludes other things. So I've always felt, since my boys were growing up, that I'd like to have spent more time, much more time with them. You know, so often I was in the studio. But then in some ways, my childhood kind of cut me out to have to be alone a lot. Well, alone might be just another word for selfish. I think it is, actually. I want what I want. It might come down to that, to quite simply self-centeredness, which may be another word for doing something very well and making some kind of a contribution to the world, maybe the byproduct of a form of self-centeredness. But, you know, our sins lack originality. And so it may be the most common and necessary sin. I don't really use that word, hardly ever. It's not a very pleasant or useful word, I don't find, in this context. Yes, not a useful word.
No. Yeah, it's an interesting
feel
question.
Bad. Oh, I have an excellent word for you, sin.
Yeah. And God feels bad as well. In fact, God's judging you.
That's right. So no one feels good about this.
No, no, no. Yeah, it's a good question. I'd like to ask it because it's whenever a woman talk to a woman artist, not every time, but often, particularly if the woman is a parent, they'll come on these questions about, you know, how do you balance being a mother and a painter? And it only dawned on me like a little while ago. It's like, yeah, I never asked that to men, and so I'm kind of complicit in that, just, you know, natural thing. So it's like it's interesting to find out the mechanics of, you know, who looked after your children while you were in the studio. How did that work? Because that's the sort of question that women artists are, you know, they're just, it's like, oh, well, you're a mother, so, you know, you've got to figure that out.
Yes. I think women have the bad end of this whole thing. They have the bad end of living in an essentially male world, and with the primal drives of motherhood that are really, really powerful drives, actually, pretty inescapable drives that they have, that compel them to a sense of responsibility that I don't think men really have a grasp on. You know, some nice guy might spend time with his children because he's sort of a nice guy, but I don't think that men as a gender are hardwired to have no choice. I think women don't have a lot of choice because they are wired to it. Probably for civilization, for humanity, they are wired to look after the children, whereas men get to choose.
Yeah, I think that's changing. I think that I think there's a certain
Thankfully,
element.
yes.
Yeah, I think there's a certain element of that. I don't know what the percentage is, but I think it's growing, where there's a conditioning element of it. So there's because I know women who are like, who feel terrible because they don't have any maternal urges, and they don't want to have children, and they don't even like children that much, and they feel awful about it, you know. Because it's goes so counter to what society sort of tells them. And then similarly, I know some men, like I know one man who he was in a relationship with a woman. They weren't married or anything like that, and she had two boys, and then she just abandoned them. She just left the family, right? So he had these two young boys, and they were young, you know, like they were like sort of 3 and 5 kind of thing. And he was pretty much just left with them. And he, without batting an eyelid, just took them on and parented them all the way through up until they became young men, you know? So I know what you mean about that kind of biological thing, but I not it's certainly not all women, for sure, and I wonder how much of it is conditioning. But it's a good thing to think about, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if those women that don't have any maternal urges in them, if they feel bad about it, then they truly have it bad both ways. because because on the one hand, they are compelled by primal urges to be completely responsible and forget about themselves for at least 20 years. And then if they don't have it, if they also feel bad about them, there's no way to feel good. You know? But having said that, I mean, some mothers are completely happy being mothers. But I mean, overall, though, I think it's worse for women, and that wherever clear intention and policy come in, I think developing cultures where child raising is definitely shared is much more fair, really, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like it's very similar to what I was saying about being able to see your own lens. Like it's very hard for me as a man to to see my male privilege, because it's just part of the scenery for me. I don't even think about it. So I have to work.
Yeah.
I have to do a lot of work. I have to talk to a lot of female friends and get their perspective and kind of tell me about, oh, oh, right, yeah, if you go running at night, it's terrifying for you. I wouldn't even give it a second thought. Things like that. Or
That's right.
things like,
Yes.
child rearing, and or what it's like to be a woman who doesn't particularly like children or babies. I wouldn't
Yes.
even think about that, so I have to really work at it to try and understand it better.
That's right. For a woman, their experience of life is incomprehendibly different to a man.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Goulash Dogan in Turkey again says, how does it feel to be one of the greatest living painters?
Well, that is very, very kind and very thoughtful. I think it opens a very interesting can of worms, actually. In Grenada, when I lived in the Caribbean, they used to have a machete that they called a cutlass, and that was used for everything. It was used as a hammer, a saw, as a lawnmower. It was, people never went anywhere without this cutlass, which must have come, from the pirate cutlass and everything. And I think that the judgment of art and the judgment of how good or bad an artist is a bit like the cutlass, in that it is a greatly overused tool. Because although we definitely need creative judgment and technical judgment in order to make the art, an overarching judgment in a good, bad, right, wrong context for an artist is not really very helpful. And one of the things that young artists always really have to learn very much is that gallery owners and art dealers do not necessarily know what a good painting is or what a bad painting is, but they do have a preference as opposed to God's almighty judgment on what is good art and bad art. And the truth about it is, John, is that ultimately history decides. And periods of history decide. In other words, an artist is relevant in this period of history. All his paintings are in the museum, but in 100 years, he is no longer relevant. He can't be understood any longer. And suddenly they're all in the basement. So this good, bad thing comes and goes in history. But if people have the illusion that I'm good at what they do, that's a very nice illusion, and I'm very happy about it. Long may it continue.
Very good. What's the last piece of art you bought?
Wow, that's a very interesting question. It's been years and years and years. I think it was about 10 years ago in Texas, maybe, yeah. I started buying the work of a lady who made these constructions, and I bought them as gifts. And it was that long ago. And then I entered a whirlwind. It's been a whirlwind since that time. Not sufficient stability to start looking carefully. And, these last few years as well with COVID, it's been,
Yeah.
Times have changed.
I have this question where I ask people, if you're on a desert island and there was nobody else there, classic desert island sort of things, but you had all your food and all your shelter and you had art materials, would you make art if no one was ever going to see it?
Yes, I believe I would. Because a little bit like my friend in Tehran, I would want to have existed. And on the desert island, I would have a definite sense of my own mortality. And I'd want to leave a sign of this mortality in this world, this life, this perspective that I've got. So I think I would, but I'd probably make very different paintings, though, is the
Yeah.
truth. I think
In
I
what way
would,
would they
yeah.
be different?
Do you know? I think they might be abstracts. Yeah, I think so, yeah. Because I wouldn't be communicating to fellow human beings, you see. So
Right, yeah.
on my desert island, presumably desert island, deserted, no one will ever go there.
No.
So I'd probably make abstracts somewhat in the same way that people play chess, to make moves, lighten this, darken that, increase this, narrow that, do this, do that. I would play it like I would play chess. Lots and lots of abstracts. Pure abstraction, yeah. Layered and layered and layered until they're right, yeah. They go up on the cave walls on my island.
Nahora Isabel Perez in Colombia says, what is the theme of your work?
I suppose it's how life feels to me inside. It's my internal perspective. I guess, to clarify, it's when I trim away the things that are transitory, what is left is a perspective that is much more permanent. That's it, I think. With the temporary or very transitory things trimmed away.
Yeah, that's very good.
I think that's it, yeah. The best I can do, Nora.
Morris K. Robbins on Instagram says, what's a good way to start a career as a painter from scratch? I'm thinking of leaving the military and going to Studio Inclemente and trying to start an art career. Any schools you think are better for figurative artists?
One thing for sure is that leaving the military and making art instead is a very good decision. An excellent decision. And then it really doesn't matter what kind of art you make, but you've already made a great decision. So, but I think I often give the same advice to that question to artists that are really starting out. What I say to them is, you should forget about style completely in the beginning and learn skills. And interestingly, learn it almost like being in the army. Really, absolutely drill yourself in drawing, color, concept, knowledge, art history, only from the point of view of what have the various genres done. Not by way of finding a style, but by way of understanding what has been accomplished, and learn all those skills and pile them in and listen to no one as regards your art. It's all practice. And when quite a high level of skill and capability has been achieved, then in parallel, hopefully you were falling in love, getting your heart broken, watching a lot of films, reading very good books, and having life experiences, and now bring all that you are to bear on your work and make that the foundation of the art that you make. Yeah.
Very good. He then goes on to say, how would you recommend someone with no exposure get themselves out there?
there's a very simple recipe, really. And what it is to work into the overlap. In every period in history, a certain language, artistic language, is understood. So study everything that is going on right now in the art world, in galleries. Read about it, study it, look at it, try to understand it, write about it. Really make it a career to understand the language and the discussion that is going on now, the conversation that is happening in the art world. And do an equal amount of study into yourself and your wishes and desires, your longings, how you feel, the kind of art that you know you can make, and go and work into the overlap. Work into the Venn diagram, the place where the language that is understandable in the world, that you make art within that language so that it is understandable to this period in history, but it has integrity. You've got to do both. You've got to keep your integrity, but also make a kind of art that can be understood. Both, without compromise to either.
Wow, that is gold. I haven't heard anyone say something like that before. That's very good.
And I think the same for music, John, too. It's the same thing. Like, what is going on in the music world? What is understandable in this generation? But what is really in my heart to do? Look for the overlap. Find what you can do, but which is understood. Otherwise, you'll starve, and then you won't make it anyway. You know. So you've got to pay your bills. So you've got to appeal. Let's not deny that. It's not like giving away your heart, selling your soul. It doesn't have to be at all. You can do both. But you've got to understand both very, very deeply to look for the overlap. Yeah, that's it.
I must say, Edward, that is a very mature perspective for somebody who said they were a bit childlike. That's very practical. Very... That is very, very practical advice.
I change by turns. I turn around and I'm completely foolish and guileless.
Give us your Australian accent again.
It's just great, John.
I lived in Australia for 10 years, so I'm really appreciating your
really? Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now, we're kind of talking a bit around the art business. What's your experience been of it? I know it's changed a lot. Some people have lovely stories about lovely relationships with galleries, and other people have horror stories. How have you found it in general?
I've had pretty much everything you can imagine. Everything you can imagine, really. I've had great relationships, really very nice, very profitable, function really well. And I've had nightmares, absolute nightmares, been completely cheated and, stolen from, and really the works. So I've had all of that, but I've had the other as well. And so I guess in those relationships, I'm very pragmatic. In other words, I prepare for the worst and look for the best. So I'll read a contract very, very carefully, and I'll look at the numbers and ask for breakdowns and understand it and know, I guess I've done it enough to know what to insist on and what is important and what I should expect on the one hand, So I'm kind of critical and careful in that way. But on the other hand, I like to be just really friendly, have a great time, be honorable, do what I say, and keep commitments, and just be pleasant to work with, and hope for the best. Just have a lovely time
Yeah.
with them. But I do both. I do both. I look
Yeah.
very carefully at deals, contracts, arrangements. Yeah, both.
What sort of price range are your paintings selling for at the moment?
They're mainly in US dollars, which I came to think in because I was in the States for so long. So I came to think in those terms. And because New York has kind of been one of the biggest centers in the world for the longest time in the art world, um, uh, I'm usually somewhere between $13,000 and $27,000 for each painting, and yeah, that's about it. The retail price, and the retail price, of course, is consistent worldwide, whether it's from me or from a dealer, one of my galleries. They're consistent,
Yeah.
so that no one's undercutting anyone else.
Yeah. And the difference in price is to do with size?
Is to do with size, yeah. I mean, the
Yeah.
way that those kinds of things work is that when I'm dead, there'll be such a thing, because then they can be a lot more analytical. Time will have passed, and there'll be a consensus. That's the word. The consensus will be that this is a particularly good Povey painting, and this is not such a good Povey painting. And so there may be a price difference between them. And of course, that may switch around in 100 years or something, if they last that long. So, but that, I'm not dead yet. So at this point in my career, they are bought by the square inch, but there is an S in the graph, because you find if you price art, because all art is now priced by the square inch, basically. It's the only way to price it. I mean, I have reasons for that, honestly, but there has to be an S in the graph like that. And the reason there has to be an S is that if you put the same price per square inch on paintings of this size and on paintings like the one behind me, you find that the small ones are so cheap that they're ridiculous, and it doesn't even pay for the time to make them. And the large paintings are so expensive that no one can afford them. So you have to take the small ones up in price per square inch and the large ones down in price, and it puts an S in the graph. Yeah, that's how it works. And it makes sense. When you look at them side by side, you say, yeah, that's about right. But they have a different price per square inch, yeah.
Yeah, very good. Again,
And that
very practical.
incrementally grows. It incrementally grows as time goes by. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted.
No, I'm just smiling at how that's very practical, savvy, shrewd, not childlike advice.
Maybe I'm pretending to be a child, which is the kind of thing a child would do.
That's true.
They're
Well, if
always
you are,
pretending.
you're doing a very good impression.
I know. Thank you.
Speaking of dying, do you have a big art dream you'd like to achieve before you die?
My art dream is in transition. I would quite like my work. Oh, and I'm actually entering a period where it is increasingly analyzed and written about and talked about, and I like that. I like it. I like it, and when people write about me, And recently, an Italian film director made a documentary about me, and they always very kindly ask me, "What do you want me to say, or will you censor it? After I've done, so that it's accurate." And I always say to them the same thing. I say, "No, no, I'd like you to have your perspective, and I don't want to do anything to that, because everyone will have their perspective, and I like that. I like for those things to vary. One person says, yeah, he's like this or he's doing this. And another one to say, no, no, I disagree. I think he's doing that. Because the truth is probably somewhere in the middle of all those things. Or in fact, they might all be true simultaneously. And I like it. I don't want to censor it or restrict it. So in a sense, my dream is coming true that that lots of people have different views on what I'm doing. I like that very much. Yeah.
That requires a certain lack of ego, because a lot of people are concerned with what other people think of them. So to take that approach of like everybody's perspective of me, basically what everybody thinks of me is right.
Well, I definitely have an ego, and I'm definitely upset if people criticize what I'm doing. I'm definitely upset. I can't deny that. So the best thing is, here's the thing about it, is I do not own a television. I don't listen to the radio. I never read newspapers, and I haven't read them since I was a teenager. I don't buy magazines. I think that, people say, well, you are very uninformed then. Well, actually, I have fallen in love several times in my life. I have straightened the hair of my father lying in a coffin. I've had friends die in many different circumstances and driven my kids through a curfew, avoiding tanks. I've been betrayed and been the recipient of enormous kindness. So I feel very well informed, very well informed. And that is sufficient. What was the question? Oh dear. What are you going to do?
Big art dream before you die.
Oh, well, there it is. Yeah. Yeah. So actually, there we are. Yes. And you said, that lacks ego, that I let them say whatever they want to say. Well, I don't read critical commentaries. I don't read newspapers. I don't read magazines. I measure them. If an article comes out about me, I'll kind of scan it and measure it and look at the pictures. I'll measure it. I'll listen to really, really good books on audio tape and absolutely love them and hear them 4 times, 5 times. I'll devote myself to that. But I never read stuff about me because I already kind of know it. So it's very boring. So I never pay any attention to it, and I don't want to pay attention to it because I want them to have their full reign. So I just let it be. Yeah, that's it. It's not a lack of ego. It's partially a lack of interest.
Very good. Right, this is my last question. I ask this to everyone who comes on the podcast. If there's one thing you could pass on to future generations, what would it be?
Apart from things like be kind, and be yourself. I suppose apart from paintings, of course, I'd like to pass on paintings. But other than that, we have to trust them not to learn from history, because we haven't. And I'm going to be history. So there's no advice I can give to them, because I have no right to give them advice. I never took any.
Look, you had me at be kind. That's enough for me.
Yes, that'll do it. That'll do it. Yes.
Actually, it wasn't my last question, because there was another question percolating around there in the background. That's a lovely answer, by the way. But I wanted to ask, because when we started, we were talking about you as a child, difficult childhood, painting the buses. And, you've spent your life so far painting and in a way kind of processing that difficult start that you had. Has it changed for you now? Like, has that process of all those years of painting, has it eased the pain of that childhood at all? Do you feel like you are more at peace with it?
I don't really know if I ever felt pain from it exactly. I certainly don't now feel active pain or distress from it. I don't think I did at the time, because I have such a capacity for joy and humor, and I'm so interested in things and in what I'm doing. I'm so very interested. But there are things that I've buried from the past that I don't know what to do with. And I suspect that there are some things in our lives and some regrets and some betrayals and regrets that literally have no answer. So they cannot be come to terms with, in a sense. They can be buried, but that's all. There's no other way to deal with them. And that's what I've done. I've buried some things, and I'm capable of being very happy and loving what I do. And that's my solution.
Yeah.
Psychotherapy would be a long, endless paid interview with no understandable end. No, and certainly a waste of money. So
I remember hearing an interview with Leonard Cohen, and somebody asked him a similar kind of question, and he was like, well, the only way I can describe it is when I was a young man, I had a black cloud of angst and sorrow and depression hanging over me. And now that I'm an older man, the cloud is not so big.
That's right.
It's got a bit thinner.
I feel the same. I feel the same. There's a lot of angst. Yeah, that's right. So there it is.
Yeah, beautiful.
Thank you, John.
You're very welcome. I love your paintings. It's been a delight chatting with you. You've managed to get into your paintings all the things that you have aspired to, or that you've said that here. You do get across a lot of humanity in them. There's a lot of recognizable things for me anyway when I look at them. I mean, technically they're lovely. They're, masterfully done, but the impact of them and they sort of disengage my brain a bit. Like when I look at them, I feel a lot more than I know. And my brain is trying to catch up and make sense of what it is that I'm feeling. There's a lot of deep recognition when I look at them. And they're they're not easy paintings to look at. I find. I mean,
No.
aesthetically they're lovely, but the emotions that they that I immediately feel when I look at them, they're not easy, and they're and it's disturbing even that I don't really know what they are when I'm looking at them. But I think that just adds
Yes.
up to the power of them, that they are kind of reflecting back to me. Like when you were talking about the way that you show the different surfaces of the, like the table, the side and the top, you know, that to me can, like when I, like how I receive that is it conveys the disjointed kind of quality that a disturbing experience can have, or how it's almost like
Yes.
a visual representation of disassociation that can occur during trauma. So it's all those things, because there's parts of the painting that evoke sweetness, and then another part of the same painting will be evoking sorrow, and another part will be evoking hope, and another part despair, and it's all happening at the same time. So I mean, to be able to do that, to make all that happen in the same painting is pretty amazing. So
I'm
it's,
so glad
yeah.
you feel that. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome. And it's been
Thank
lovely
you,
chatting
John.
with you. It's been lovely chatting with you,
It's
even
been
before
a
we,
complete joy talking to you.
even in our email correspondence, there was, yeah, your sort of kindness and your energy came across even before we turned on the Zoom.
Oh,
So
that's
I
very
keep,
sweet of you.
you're welcome. So I keep in touch with everybody. So I'm sure we'll keep in touch for Zoom tea, or maybe if you're in Ireland, you'll come and visit.
Yes,
But
I would
yeah,
love to.
we'll say goodbye for now.
Goodbye, everyone, and thank you.
I've never felt this good in my entire life. Make me some spaghetti.
Actually, I'd prefer a cup of tea. A cup of tea would be lovely. So yeah, just a little reminder, mainly because every second or third person who becomes a patron has got in touch with me and said, you know what, I've been listening to your podcast for ages, and I didn't become a patron, not because I don't have the money, not because I don't think it's great, I just didn't get around to it. So this is a little friendly reminder that if you'd like to be a patron, you'd like to buy me a cup of tea, go to patreon.com/John Dalton, gently does it, all one word, or follow the link in the show notes to become a patron. I would really appreciate it if you could do that, particularly if you've been meaning to and you just haven't got around to it. It would be great. It would mean a lot to me. All right, thank you. Bye.
We are the Argyle Pimps, so buy us a drink. We're better than you thought, but not as good as we think. We are the Argyle Pimps, so buy us a drink. Come on, buy us a drink. Come on, buy us a drink. We are the Argyle Pimps, so buy us a drink. We're better than you thought, but not as good as we think. We are the Argyle